Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Quianna Canada. Welcome back to Quianna's Shelf. Before we get into tonight's topic, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Remember that your likes and your shares, what it does is it pushes videos like this up in the algorithm. It tells the algorithm that videos like this are important, but we must be reminded that just because videos like this are not pushed up in the algorithm, that is not an indication that videos like this are not important. Ladies and gentlemen, you can head over to my Facebook account at Quianna Canada, Quianna, last name is Canada. You can head over to that account and follow me there on Facebook. Also, if you want to have a discussion about what I upload on this channel, feel free to reach out to me by following me on Facebook and sending me a message. Tonight, we are going to continue our discussion about on Black history and eulogizing Black Americans in history and giving them their flowers. And tonight I have for you Enslaved Freeman. And I'll explain the differences of names, but she was also referred to as Mumbet. And there are different spellings of this within books and online. So for instance, in the book that I have, which is Creating African Black Americans, African American History and Its Meaning, 1619 to the Present, in Nell Irvin, painter's book, they spell Mumbet as two separate words, M-A-U-M, and then so the M is capitalized, and then Bet is her last name, so it's B-E-T-T. And then we have an entry that is online that spells it quite differently, which is Mumbet as one word, that's capital M-U-M-B-E-T. So there's different spellings of the name, but Mumbet was born in 1742 and resided in Massachusetts. In 1781, she petitioned the Massachusetts court for her freedom. Massachusetts, what it did was it abolished slavery in 1783, which impacted Maine. Now, Maine at this time was a part of Massachusetts until 1820. Before Mumbet went on this freedom journey to petition for, of course, to emancipate herself from her captors, there were 4 enslaved men that petitioned the Massachusetts General Court for their freedom. This happened in 1773. But it's important to understand, and I was watching an important discussion on Mumbet, which I will link in the description box below. And in that discussion, Kiera Singleton tells us that the first person that sued for their freedom, to be free from their captivity, was an enslaved Black person named Adam. And he sued in 1701, and then in 1703 he won the lawsuit. And I'm not sure, it wasn't immediately clear to me as to whether or not there were some appeals, whether he lost and then there was an appeal, or if when he sued he won on the first instance. If this case drug out for a year or so, it's unclear to me there. But what I do know is that oftentimes in the 1700s, what would happen is that groups of Black men who were enslaved would come together to petition the courts, especially in Massachusetts, and Kira Singleton tells us that oftentimes what would happen is that although they petitioned for their freedom, they would not win. But what this would do is it would go on to create breadcrumbs, and then not only breadcrumbs, but it would lead to a president to be established. And I'm not certain if this was happening within other states within the United States. I'm certain that it was happening, but I would really need to do more research to discover exactly like where that was happening during the 1700s. But I can only imagine that this would have created a intolerable conflict throughout the circuit courts, right? Because if circuit courts are giving different opinions, some circuit courts are saying that blacks are not free, while others are saying that blacks are free. This would create an intolerable conflict between the circuit courts, which would call upon the U.S. Supreme Court to remedy that contradiction between the courts. And so when Mumbet petitioned for her freedom, she called on the assistance of a man named Theodore Sedgwick, who was also a plantation owner, I believe, and engaged in the act. He was a lawyer, I think, as well, but engaged in the act of writing these petitions and for enslaved Africans and helping them to achieve their freedom papers. And so she went to Sedgwick and he agreed to help her, and she won. she won her freedom. And she was one of the first women in Massachusetts to own her own property. And her name was on the deed of her property. And when she became free, she chose this name, Freedman, as her last name, Elizabeth Freedman, which was interesting. There was much discussion about why she didn't choose a free woman. But I think that just during that time, the name Freeman was more common, especially when we look at the Freedmen's Bureau. It was very common. Singleton, she also tells us within this discussion that Elizabeth Freedman is in a long line of black women who have always utilized the courts to advocate on behalf of themselves, to advocate for other black communities, and to define freedom on their own terms. And I thought that that was an interesting way of looking at it. Her being within this long line of black women who said, I'm not taking this anymore. I deserve to be treated like everyone else. And whether or not that means that I have to petition the courts myself, I deserve to be treated. I deserve, I'm not, I'm understanding that my circumstances aren't equal. That's what I was put on earth for. This is what I deserve. And within this discussion, Sophie Hall, she tells us that what these lawsuits were called, they were called freedom lawsuits, a meaning of asserting a legal claim to seek freedom. And I think it raises for me an important question as to whether there is continuity with these types of lawsuits, not just in the United States, but outside the United States, wherever a black American is in a society where it is dominated by, of course, whites. and their rights are being stripped away from them. We do understand that any country that is aligned with the United States or has a friendship with the United States, there is likely going to be groupthink. That's not to say that all countries engage in groupthink, but some countries that are aligned with the United States have this follow the leader mentality that if the United States treats Black Americans horribly and wrongfully, that they follow suit in doing the same thing. That's, some may say, well, how is that when Blacks are in the United States? Well, sometimes Black people move abroad, and sometimes there are Black Americans who file an asylum application against the United States for its ill treatment and for the persecution that they've gone through. And right now there's a deep discussion within the echo chambers of online communities about what it really means to be a descendant of slaves. And there is an argument that if you are a descendant of slaves, that you don't flee the United States, that you stay and you duke it out. But that's really not how it was looked at in history. Fleeing persecution and freeing enslavement was looked at as a very courageous act. It was looked at as a quest for, essentially, in plain terms, a quest for freedom. And not everybody can stay in the United States or stay within a state, or even back then when there were when we had chattel slavery, not everyone felt comfortable with that ill treatment. That's why we had Harriet Tubman, we had others who left the plantation because we just did not feel comfortable. We knew something was wrong with how we were being treated. And so that is a discussion that I really want to have at a later date. I am collecting a lot of information on that, and there are a couple of online influencers that have been embroiled in this debate that I really want to bring harmony with regards to the arguments that they are making. As for the discussion about Mumbet that was online, a woman named LaMercy Frazier, she tells us, of course, I think to reiterate, Mumbet was not a woman at that time who could read or write. And it was just by the very act of listening to those around her, listening to the discussions of those around her and those talking about their own freedom, did Mumbet say, hey, I should be free too. Hey, they're free. I should be free too. Like, how are they doing this? I'm going to do it too. And LaMercy, she gives us a quote. This is what she heard. This is what Mumbet heard. Quote, that mankind in a state of nature are equal, free and independent of each other, and have a right to the undisturbed enjoyment of their lives, their liberty, and their property. The undisturbed enjoyment of their lives, their liberty, and their property. After hearing that, she was like, hey, this is what I'm seeking. I'm seeking freedom. I'm seeking to have an undisturbed enjoyment of my life, my liberty, my freedom. And I thought that that was interesting. For Elizabeth Freeman and other Black Americans, emancipation has always been viewed through the lens of positive freedom. So positive freedom consists of, quote, being one's own master, end quote. Positive freedom relates to the capacity of people to realize their potential and to achieve fulfillment. So, of course, Mumbet, what she sought to do was to realize her potential as a free person apart from being enslaved and being told what to do, being under someone's control. And to go on to have an independent life of that captivity. Now, it is important to say that once Mumbet did gain her freedom, she did still remain with working for, I think how they describe it as on the plantation, or with this particular family that she emancipated herself from. But the difference here, ladies and gentlemen, is that work was on her own terms. So for example, if she decided, you know what, I'm just tired of this, I don't want to do this anymore, and she walked away, she couldn't be punished for that. And she couldn't be held in captivity because she was the property of somebody else. She was her own person. She was the creator of her own destiny. Now, early philosophers embrace a positive conception of freedom, defining it as the ability of people to make the most and best of themselves. And I think when the United States releases its stranglehold on Black Americans, so there's two things going on right now. First, the United States has not atoned for its participation in the transatlantic slave trade. It has not given enslaved Africans, descendants of slaves that are in the United States, that have been there since they were born, and whose ancestors have been there since they were born and throughout history, has not repaired that harm that was caused. And if the United States is refusing or unwilling to engage in a reparatory discussion, a very serious one, and to issue reparations to descendants of slaves, then I think the second best option is to allow Black Americans to emancipate themselves, if they choose to do so, from the country. I seen a video on Facebook where there was a woman from Greenland, and she was talking about how the United States was, of course, what has been in the headlines was the United States sending ships, hospital ships, to Greenland to give aid and hospital care to the people of Greenland. And the woman was like, we have health care in Greenland, affordable health. They have affordable health care. They have an affordable health care plan in Greenland, something that United States citizens don't have. And so it's interesting that the United States would seek to take care of persons that are not its own citizens without them asking for the assistance, without them even needing it, and not even give that kind of assistance to the American people. Again, going back to this, it's the ability for people to make the most and best of themselves. So if Black Americans decided that they want to emancipate themselves from the United States, we should be allowed to do that and to try and live a better life somewhere else. And I understand most people want to live in the United States, but that is because there is a strong propaganda campaign about what it feels like and what it means to live in the United States. And I hear it here from a lot of immigrants who are surprised that I am a Black American in the asylum process, because they think that once you go to the United States, there's no racism, that there's no discrimination, that once you go to the United States that you automatically come up very fast and get things, and it's a society where your dreams come true in an instant. And that's really not the case, especially when you're dominated by a system of white supremacy. And it is true, once the white supremacists within the United States, which a lot of them are working in the US government, once they remove that boot off our neck and leave us alone to do our own thing, which we have sought to do for a very long time, and to do it legally as what we sought to do for a very long time, you'll see that Black Americans can prosper. But I don't think that that is what the U.S. really wants. It doesn't want a country that is equal in all respects. That's not everyone. That's not to say that that's everyone in the United States. But it does certainly feel like that is the temperature. Freedom has also been portrayed in the form of self-realization and self-fulfillment. So how do I realize this? How do I realize that? How can I fulfill this for myself? How can I do this for myself? And truthfully, when we look at it very clearly, Black Americans have been doing it themselves and for themselves. It is only when we have a very toxic white supremacist in power that is seeking to hold on to that harmful legacy and to stop us from being able to realize our goals and to fulfill our dreams. It is only when that is inserted in our life do we not. Now, I know that some of you will take umbrage with the word white supremacist. And again, this channel is not a hub for hate. It is not an incitement to violence or hate against any group, whether that's within the United States, here in Belfast, or anyone in the Republic of Ireland, or anywhere in any nation. It is definitely not calling for a rebellion of some sort against white people. What this series this month does is it pinpoints the problem and how Black Americans have endeavored to separate ourselves from these institutions and these practices that harm us and that continue to harm us in history. And by calling it white supremacy, that is not saying that all white people are white supremacists. That is not saying that all white people engage in an act of racism or have this ideology. By naming it white supremacy is to name the harm, to name the harm that is still causing us significant harm today. Essentially, that's what it is. It's a harm. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we should give Mumbet her flowers and all of those strong, determined Black Americans who have realized that they were worth more than what they were getting. And to commemorate their legacy and to not only do that, but to understand how that developed in the past, how they gained their freedom, and to continue to build on that. And I think that that's what Black Americans have done within the United States, is built on that legacy. And it raises an important question because, to reiterate, a lot of times Black Americans would go to these courts themselves and petition for their rights. It raises an important question as to if this is where it all started. I know that this has occurred throughout the entire world, self-representation. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I want to leave you with that. I am going to link that discussion in the description box below. I hope this was an informative video, and we are going to talk to you next time. Bye-bye.